what do we bring to the table that is unique and helpful? Are we, in fact, swimming against the tide, or maybe in the wrong direction? Rudolf Steiner thought that the section was quite important. When he founded our section after the Christmas conference in 1923 as a faculty of the School for Spiritual Science, Rudolf Steiner made the remark that the tasks of the Literary Arts and Humanities, or the section for beautiful sciences, as it's called in German, these tasks have been put aside and overlooked, quote, to the detriment of humanity. Now, those are strong words. Here is a picture of the cover of that old section yearbook in which we find helpful essays about sections' meaning and methodology. We also find an essay, The Origin of Fairy Tales. This essay highlights a diagram of the section done by Friedrich Hebel. Dr. Hebel's diagram is very interesting in many respects, and he used it to explain what he thought we were doing and how it all worked. Our eyes may at first be drawn to the items listed on the circumference of the circle. Now, one of these is fairytale studies, but we also see other names: poetics, aesthetics, dramaturgy, linguistics, mythology, art history, 7 in all. And at the very center of the diagram sits Poesia. Now the question arises, do these 7 faculties or disciplines radiate out from the center point Poesia, or do they contain the center point Poesia? And what is the relationship of Poesia to those 7 points of the diagram? Who or what is Poesia? And how does wisdom, Sophia, and the human being, Anthropos, relate to Poesia and the 7 star points? For the purposes of this short talk, I suggest that instead of reading Poesia as a solar point of centering focus, like a sun amid planets with regular orbits, I propose instead that we see Poesia as a dark forest. Constructed about this dark forest is a fence with 7 little shacks where many little woodsmen and woodswomen live and keep watch over the forest and appreciate the forest and discuss it and praise it, each in his or her own way. At each of the 7 stations, we appreciate views of the dark forest from the perspective of these marvelously situated 7 shacks, each with a spacious balcony and a view, and we linger and indulge ourselves at every shack. Now, I don't know, maybe one day, however, we get tired of walking around and around the dark forest on the path from shack to shack. Even though the trail is very pleasant and the views are sublime and the signage is more than adequate, and we travel in good company and the shacks are all, so very cozy, and the conversation and food and beverage, it's all very wonderful, and dinner always puts us to sleep, and we have amusing and sometimes lucid dreams. But, I don't know, maybe one day, maybe we get frisky, or we hear a strange bird, or meet a stranger coming out of the dark forest, or maybe a weird old woman, a dakini, on a forest trail, greets us and burns our books of philosophy and critical theory and smacks us and calls us dumbhead and screams and cries. It's very insulting and upsetting. As a result of meeting this weird old woman or stranger, or maybe we didn't meet anyone, we just got bored and fidgety. As a result, we decide to stray off the path. Instead of walking in circles around the dark forest and enjoying pleasant, worthy conversations in the 7 respectable shacks, we decide one day to walk straight toward the dark forest and go into it. As soon as we make this decision, all the woodsmen and woodswomen in the shacks show great concern. Many of them run after us and give us helpful maps or detailed instructions, or they scold us and tell us we're being silly because we're unqualified, or maybe they give advice and food and water, and they warn us to stay hydrated and keep your feet dry. Finally, we thank them and we go on our way. And after a while, they go back to their shacks because it is time for conversation and lunch. So we wave bye-bye and set off. After a while, we come to a clearing at the edge of the dark forest. A golden shaft of sunlight has penetrated through the dense canopies of beeches and oaks, and the glade or clearing shines in this shaft of sunlight. The golden air is fragrant and inviting. It seems to speak directly to the soul. For a moment, we even have an instant of spirit remembering. The clearing is silent and a bit magical, as I said, and it feels uncanny yet strangely familiar. But the dark forest still lies ahead. Now, funny thing, we thought that those 7 shacks protected and tended the dark forest, and that this pleasant clearing that we found might be an excellent place to stop and build another shack. But instead of finding a real estate agent, we just press on. We leave this clearing and re-enter the dark forest, known as Poetica. And soon the clearing is lost. As often happens in fairy tales, we slowly begin to intuit that this dark forest is enchanted. And like the enchantments of modern physics, those black holes or wormholes so-called, this dark forest appears to be a place, but it is really a point of entry to a vast mindscape of being and time. What happens next to us there in the dark forest? And how does that experience change what we call our spirit and imagination? Well, that's all the fairy tale I have time to share in this short presentation. It's up to you to write the rest of the story for yourself. If this were a university class, that's what I'd tell the students to do, in small groups or individually. Before we end, I just want to point to the essay on the history of the section written by Christiana Hyde, who is the section leader at the Goetheanum. This is the essay that recently appeared on our website, along with that essay on the origin of fairy tales that I spoke about earlier. In this essay on the history of the section, Christiana Hyde references the same diagram by Friedrich Hebel that I discussed in this short video and in our meeting on March 5, 2022. Christiana highlights some remarks by Friedrich Hebel, and it is significant that in these remarks Friedrich Hebel, who was the former leader of our section, you might recall, specifically mentions Novalis in relation to our section's meaning and methodology. We've spent a lot of time on Novalis in our recent section work since 2019. Novalis entered our work at the beginning of the COVID crisis, and he has remained. If we're looking for clues about our section's relevance and methodology, then I agree with Friedrich Hebel and with Rudolf Steiner that we should look at Novalis and take Novalis seriously. In our North American section meetings, we've been trying to build a bridge to Novalis in that regard. This is especially important as we approach the 100-year anniversary of Rudolf Steiner's last address, in which Rudolf Steiner once again and for the final time in public emphasized Novalis. In future section meetings, if the conditions are favorable, I'll discuss the karmic biographies of Novalis, so-called, that Rudolf Steiner presented during the almost quarter century of his work in the anthroposophical movement. From a literary point of view, as Rudolf Steiner has presented it, Novalis gathers into his writings the inspirations that are the source spring of spiritual science. The years in which Novalis lived, and the literature of that period, are critical to an understanding of the anthroposophical movement, and in that respect critical to an understanding of our section's meaning and methodology. I say this to underscore what Rudolf Steiner himself said about that period, lest we forget or overlook his words. One cannot explain the fairy tale without having gone through certain events that occurred in Germany quietly and invisibly between 1790 and 1820. These are the years in which we find the text that is the germinal seed of the anthroposophical movement, and that would be Goethe's Fairytale of the Green Snake and Beautiful Lily. Novalis was aware of this fairy tale and was inspired by it. Is the fairy tale mightier than philosophy? This is a question that I like to ask tongue-in-cheek, but also with a serious eye turned in the direction of Novalis. Thank you for your attention and for your interest in the section for the Literary Arts and Humanities, and for your interest in the dark forest and romanticism. Good night.